You've heard me talk about how good this guy is at his job. He's one of the best in the business nationally, and yet you have the fortune of him covering you locally. He can be somewhat divisive at times. We got into it even a little bit all the way back in 2015, but now he's not only a colleague, he is a friend. We're going to bring on EJ Holland from the Wolverine.com On3 Sports here in just a few moments on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, there he is. We've got him over to my, do I have it correct? Nope, always mirrored that way. EJ Holland from On3. He's over at the Wolverine. As all of you know, I believe I'm a comp subscriber now, but I was a paid subscriber for 2 years, which is not something I have to do, right? And I'm not like trying to steal intel and all that kind of stuff, but it's always good to be a part of a board. And also, if I'm not following a certain topic or trend, or like I hadn't been covering recruiting since the end of 2021, to kind of see what you're saying. And from my like actual stance, stepping back, I think you're the best. So I'm glad to have you on here.
No, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for the kind words. As my little Oompa Loompa friend likes to say, real recognize real. You're a real one, man. You've always been great. And so no, you just keep it, straight up, and you work hard, and you're very good at your job. And so, there's a mutual respect there. So you like to say I can be a little divisive, but no, man, I mean, like I said, shout out to you for just being one of the best people on the beat. Like, I don't feel like there's anybody that can say they don't like Isaiah Hole, like
there's people. There are certainly people.
maybe about me, but not necessarily about you. But anyway, man, I appreciate you for having me on this show. It's been a long time coming. I can't believe I've never been on this show before. So, I'm excited to be here.
It takes a while for me to eventually get guests on for whatever reason. Clayton, it's funny because now I can't really get Clayton on the show easily, like if I want to, which, he's like, oh, I don't know. But like Clayton's going to hate that I'm saying this. He begged to be on the show at one point. He's like, when am I going to be on your show? When am I going to be on your show? When am I going to be on your show? And I was like, fine. Okay. Because every time I have a guest, it requires a lot of extra editing and stuff like that, unless it's in person. Then otherwise, like, it adds like a half hour to an hour sometimes to the workflow. So I'm sometimes reticent. But we met all the way back in person, because we are colleagues in terms of the nebulous right now, right? Like, we're at different outlets, but we are colleagues. But we were actually colleagues at the same company back in 2015, 2016. That's when I met you in person. Was back in 2016 at one of the practices for the Army All-American Bowl. And I remember you at that time were persona non grata for Michigan fans, because you were saying like, Jordan Elliott's not going to stay committed to Michigan. He's going to Texas. And you were 100% right, but everyone hated you for it. And then you create some enemies here and there, but I find like you're more right than not. So just before we get into actual recruiting, what is that like to kind of toe that line, right? Where it's like, you're going to upset rival fans. Sometimes you upset fans of the same fan base, but I would say you have like a 90% hit rate when it comes to opinions, and higher than that when it comes to actual recruiting predictions. So how do you kind of like balance that?
Yeah, for me, I always approach this job with, I'm here to try to give you the most accurate information. It's not necessarily the information you'll like at times, especially here recently, given Michigan's struggles a bit here on the recruiting trail, despite the on-field success. But, I always feel like I owe it to my audience. Like, for our site, you have to pay money to be on the site, right? So you deserve to have actual information and not just Kool-Aid, I'll give you honest evaluations. If I don't think Jaden Davis is a 5-star, which was a hot topic last cycle. I'll tell you, I don't think Jaden Davis is a 5-star. If I think Kenneth Grant's the most underrated recruit in the country, I'll tell you Kenneth Grant's the most underrated recruit in the country, you know? So it goes both ways. There's always gonna be positives. There's always gonna be negatives when you don't approach it from a fan perspective. You know, like you alluded to, I came to the Michigan beat from Texas. You know, I'm a Texas guy. And so I'm not a fan. I'm not looking at it through maize and blue goggles, but that should be good for you. You know, I'm, a fan of the San Francisco 49ers. I don't want a 49ers fan, giving me, my news necessarily, because I want it to be more objective. And so I'm always trying to provide people with the most objective, information. And then I take pride in actually getting boots on the ground evaluations. Like, yeah, I'll say I don't think Jaden Davis is a 5-star, but I'll also go see him 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. I'll say Kenneth Grant is underrated because I went out and spent time in Gary, Indiana, like 10 times, So I always feel like I need to be able to back up those claims. And we live kind of like in a world right now where people just hedge all the time. And, we're not always going to be 100% right. But I like to give more firm information than I feel like others do, just because, I feel like fans kind of hate the hedging. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm just here to provide you guys with objective information, with my opinion. Not everybody's going to be 100% right on predictions or evaluations, but I think I at least work hard enough to provide you with background on why I feel a certain way on certain topics.
You actually too, I think the boots on the ground thing, there's no one out there that sees more recruits in person than you. And like you said, you see them multiple times. It seems like you are everywhere all at once, seeing everything, and you're evaluating, which is something that I don't really have in my wheelhouse. I can come up with some basic things kind of depending on what I've seen. I remember going and seeing Cam McGrone back in 2017. When I saw him play, I was floored. I immediately told Don Brown, I'm like, you are getting an absolute beast. He was already committed to Michigan, I think, or he was about to. I'm like, absolute beast. He's a game changer, but I couldn't tell you why in the same way that you do. How did you kind of learn to become such a astute evaluator of the actual game? Like because that's obviously, like, when it comes to recruiting, when you're not one who makes the rankings and everything, but you evaluate the same way that people who do. How did you come to be able to do that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because I don't have, a Division I football background. I did play football at the high school level, but that's about it. Then I went and, got my education. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't good at it to start, when I was way back covering like SMU and the early days of Texas. I wasn't doing a lot of evaluation pieces at all. Like, I was just kind of picking up different parts of the game. And for me, something that I don't think I've ever really talked about is having those boots on the ground, being a guy that travels everywhere. You bump into a lot of college coaches, right? So you're able to pick their brains and kind of look at what they're looking at. So I feel like I've gotten so much better as an evaluator of talent just by experience of seeing how guys pan out. I've been doing this for like 12 years now. So seeing how guys pan out, what I missed, what I liked, and how that translated to the collegiate level. But again, also just bumping into the college coaches, seeing what they're looking for. And especially these last few years, like Mike McDonald, for example, I don't think people gave him the credit they should have as far as him getting out on the recruiting trail. He evaluated so well. Like, I remember standing next to him at a satellite camp, and he had this notebook, and he was taking like these super detailed notes. I was kind of like peering over his shoulder, being like, "Coach, what are you writing?" And he's like, "Ankle flexibility." And I'm like, what does that even mean? And he had it like circled with like a bunch of exclamation marks. And like, he just had these super, super detailed evaluations. And it was kind of cool to pick up some of that from Mike Macdonald. I'm using him obviously as a Michigan guy. Bumping into so many coaches from around the country definitely helps. And even, as Michigan transitioned from Mike Macdonald to Jesse Minter, is kind of the same thing. I always wrote how great of an evaluator Jesse Minter was and what he looked for. And it was cool to just be able to have those conversations with him. There are certain guys that I liked that he didn't necessarily like, and I would kind of pick his brain on why and things of that nature. So really it's just kind of experience and getting around people that have been part of the game for a long time. I think that's definitely kind of helped me be able to provide the evaluation aspect. And like I said, I think I take a lot of pride in just trying to be accurate and give my opinion, and also provide some background on how college coaches are feeling about certain players as well, especially on the Michigan side.
So a lot better than guessing, which is what I do when that's what I'll be doing tomorrow at Wayne State. I will be guessing at how the guys are doing. No, that's not true. But I do remember like my first foray into, I'd been to a couple camps. I'd already been to some practices, but it was the Army All-American Combine then in 2016. There's 500 kids there, and Steve Wiltfong tells me like take pictures of like the high end guys, and I'm like, how do I know who the high end guys are? And he's like, the kids who look like what my wife would be able to pick out as potential NFL caliber players. I'm like, okay, fair. And just looking at the size and all of that, and that's kind of been my guiding force when I do actually get out. We're going to continue on. We're going to actually talk about actual recruiting. That's probably what a lot of you are waiting for out there, actually hearing some of the prospects that you need to be interested in coming up here. We're going to do that here in just a moment. But before we do, it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So pick a ringer, any sport, figure out like who's going to make the cut, who's going to definitely have the over, and you're going to get $150 back in bonus bets. Just make sure that first $5 bet wins. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, we are still here with EJ Holland from On3, the Wolverine.com, of which I am a subscriber. I talk about them all the time. All of you are my guys, except for Zach Libby. I hate him with a fiery passion. I am just kidding. I have no bad things to say about Zach. I just had to single someone out, although I might have created an enemy in Clayton with my call out earlier. Anyway, Michigan is starting its rounds of official visits coming up on Friday, and then they are moving throughout the entire month. Obviously, there's 4 guys, maybe 5 this weekend, and you look at some of those who are going to be on campus. They've got 2 guys that some services have rated as 5 stars, and both of the Bishop Gorman guys. And then you've got some others throughout the cycle. Who are you most excited about when it comes to guys that maybe fans aren't as on top of, like the Jadon Blairs, Jamari DeLoaches, who have kind of been connected to Michigan for some time, that you feel like Michigan can make a real big move with over the course of the next month?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's start off with this weekend. Marco Jones is a guy that I actually mentioned on our podcast yesterday. Like, not enough Michigan fans seem to be really excited about Marco Jones. He's an On300 edge out of California. He had some interest in Michigan initially when Jay Harbaugh actually offered him as an underclassman, and then that quickly faded away. We didn't hear his name for basically an entire year until he popped up this spring. But man, you turn on the tape and he's an absolute monster at the middle linebacker spot for his high school. Tremendous sideline to sideline speed, great playmaking ability. But you see the measurables, you see the length, you see what he can potentially turn into as a pass rusher, and it's super exciting. I think he's listed at 6'5", 215, but I believe he weighed closer to 240 at Michigan on his unofficial visit in the spring. So, that makes his tape even more impressive, those verified measurables. But yeah, I mean, I don't think Michigan's in it with a ton of high-end edge recruits, which makes Marco Jones one of the more important official visitors, in my opinion. And his recruitment's pretty wide open. Notre Dame was thought to be the favorite, and they've completely dropped off. Now it's Michigan, Oregon, Texas, USC. I think I'm missing one other, but
Texas A&M is in there for him too.
Yeah, so
I just talked to him. That's the only reason I know that.
So I feel like, the race is pretty open there. And he seems like a Michigan kid. I had a long interview with his father, AJ, who played at Colorado after their spring or unofficial visit. And he had just so many great things to say about the program, not just on the field, but off the field, with academics, with development. So, Notre Dame no longer being in the picture is great, but it also signifies that there was some legitimate interest in leaving the West Coast. There was legitimate interest in going to a school that values both football and academics equally. And so I think Michigan would be a really great fit for him, from a culture standpoint and a playing standpoint as well. I think he could be, that next great Michigan edge. So I'm really, really high on Marco Jones. I have him as a top 100 recruit. I think he's that good. And I know those on the Michigan side feel the same way. So he would be definitely one to know. Another one coming in this weekend, Kainoa Winston out of Gonzaga in Washington, D.C., which produced Michigan offensive lineman Evan Link a couple of cycles ago. Kainoa is another kid that didn't visit Michigan at all until this spring, but he's a really exciting, fun player to watch. He's a little on the short side. He's listed at 5'10", which might be a little generous, but he has a really thick build in both halves, meaning that he can come in and play in the box if necessary. He can be a deep safety, but I really like him as a nickel, just kind of a do-it-all type of athlete. And when you turn on the tape with him, man, the closing speed is absolutely tremendous. The physicality is there for a guy that's like 5'9.5", barely 5'10". I mean, he played with violence, kind of the same way when you look at Marco Jones' tape, that pops out. So it seems like Wink Martindale just wants guys that play to hurt the opponent. So, Kainoa Winston definitely fits that bill despite the size. And, I think I don't normally like guys that have kind of a Kainoa Winston type build. Like, for example, Andre Selden was really highly touted, and I wasn't a huge fan. I thought he was pretty overranked. With Kainoa Winston, he's a borderline top 100 recruit, and I agree with it just because his tape is that phenomenal. And also just a really good kid. I've gotten to know him over the last couple of months. High academic kid, high character kid, so he fits the Michigan mold right now. That one's more of a Penn State Michigan battle. Oregon and North Carolina are the two other schools set to receive official visits. But, I think that one's more Michigan, Penn State. He's been to Penn State a ton. His cousin plays for James Franklin. So there's a comfort level there, but I think the Michigan OV can really move the needle. So, those two guys come to mind. And then, really quickly, there's two guys out of Louisiana, I think, that could end up in the class. Jacob Washington is a 6'4", 6'3" wide receiver. So he's more of that big bodied guy if Michigan's unable to get the more familiar names like Derek Meadows coming in this weekend or Quincy Porter, who everybody should know. Then Jacob Washington could very well be that bigger wide receiver in the class. And running back, it seemed like Michigan was trending the right way for Marquise Davis before he abruptly committed to Kentucky. And so I think Jasper Parker out of that same school, Archbishop Shaw in Louisiana, could very well end up being the running back in this class. And Archbishop Shaw, interesting tie there, as that's the high school that produced Ron Bellamy. So, Bellamy is recruiting both of those guys pretty hard. So those are a few names that it doesn't seem are talked a lot about. And I'm really interested to see who kind of pops up in the secondary as well. They've made guys like Winston and Jadon Blair and Jordan Young priorities, but who else is going to really emerge there as the top guy? I think, some recent offers like maybe Brandon Finney out of the DMV is one to watch, or Shamari Earls, who's committed to South Carolina. Lamar Morgan just saw him at the end of the evaluation period and is pushing hard to flip him from the Gamecocks. So yeah, those are, a handful of guys that I feel like Michigan fans should familiarize themselves with a little bit more.
All right, we're going to continue talking a little bit about recruiting. We've got about 8 or 9 minutes left. We're going to do that with EJ Holland here in just a moment. All right, final go here. We got 1 or 2 more questions for you, EJ. So we talked about the guys that you should kind of be on the lookout for when it comes to these recruiting visits. I think one of the interesting things is Michigan coming off of a national championship, despite NIL kind of mucking everything up. Michigan kind of playing from behind in a lot of ways, not willing to induce commitments in the ways that other schools are, at least not on the recruiting side as much as maybe the transfer portal side. You would think that coming off of a national championship, Michigan would be really appealing to a lot of 5-stars, and it doesn't really necessarily appear that that is the case. There's some guys that are 5-stars, like I mentioned. I can't remember which sites. Probably, I don't think it's On3, but Derek Meadows and Douglas Utu, both from Bishop Gorman, are both 5-stars on one of the recruiting services at least. There's some other guys who are out there. Do you think that Michigan will end up with anyone that at least one of the sites considers a 5-star this cycle, or do you think that this is kind of Michigan's kind of better off just kind of pursuing those kind of around 100 type level guys?
I think the majority of the class will be in that top 100 to 300 range where Michigan normally hits on. You've looked at the last few cycles, and that's what they, have really honed in on, or that's at least what's come out of the final puzzle. Once signing day comes around, they usually land those types of kids. So they have been hovering around the 15 range the last few cycles, despite all the on-field success. And of course, that can be attributed to a lack of an NIL plan on the recruiting trail, which I'm sure we could do an entire show on. But, I think Michigan needs to have some type of NIL recruiting plan to really land those types of guys. For example, you bring up Derek Meadows. I'm not very optimistic at all there. I think that could end up having some NIL. I mentioned Jacob Washington when talking about a bigger receiver because, Quincy Porter, I feel like he's a kid that could end up at Michigan, but Ohio State's obviously playing NIL in a different way than Michigan is. I just wrote about Elijah Melendez today. He's committed to Miami. He's originally from Indiana, but he plays in the Orlando area. But he's, again, committed to Miami, and obviously Miami playing NIL in a different way than Michigan. Seems like a Michigan kid all the way, like someone that Michigan would have flipped from Miami maybe in 2020 or 2021. And now there's a bit of a drawback because the NIL is just so different at one place compared to the other. So, yeah, I think NIL is the biggest, holdback. With that said, Michigan is in the mix with maybe not the five-star type guys, but a handful of the top 100s, or at least the industry top 100s. Douglas Utu is one of them. I think they need to find those types of recruitments where there's either a tie or, you can navigate around certain schools where it's not necessarily all NIL driven. So when you look at Douglas Utu, he's taking an official visit to Washington, and the only two he has set right now for the summer are Michigan and Alabama. That's not too crazy. Bama has lost a little bit of shine with Nick Saban retiring. So and you landed Micah Cobb-Hunt out of Gorman last cycle. So there is a tie. Or, Jadon Blair, he's clearly willing to leave the Carolinas and play in the Big Ten or, in the Midwest in general. That's why Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan are the schools to beat there. Andrew Olesh, Michigan does extremely well recruiting tight ends. Olesh is in Pennsylvania. It seems like he's leaning more towards the Big Ten. That one probably a Michigan-Penn State battle. So, again, they're in it with guys, Bergen Catholic with Quincy Porter. Michigan's recruited there in the past and has landed guys out of there. Campanelli's not on the staff anymore, but there's still really good ties to Bergen. So yeah, I feel like there just kind of has to be a tie, or these kids have to want to play in the Big Ten, or they have to just be the right culture fits. I always say there's Michigan kids, like you just know it when you kind of meet them, just high academic, high character kids, really good personalities that value the blue collar mentality of Michigan. So there's still some of those guys within the top 100, but it's getting more and more difficult to find them given the new NIL era.
All right, last one for you. Who are the guys who you are most excited about, whether they are current Michigan commits, or someone that Michigan is kind of clearly like in a good spot with, aside from, maybe like some of the guys we just mentioned, Marco and Quinoa, but who are you most excited about that is either already committed to Michigan or on Michigan's radar right now?
So of the commits, I'll start off with Carter Smith at quarterback. He's a tremendous athlete, one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country. I don't feel like people talk about Carter Smith enough. Last cycle, Jaden Davis had a super high ranking and then he gradually dropped, but people were so excited because at one point he was billed as a 5-star. Carter Smith's kind of working in the opposite direction. Jaden was a high floor kid. Carter is a high ceiling kid, which means that he can really rise up the rankings as a senior. And he's doing really well this offseason, improving his mechanics and his lower body work and just throwing motion. His release has gotten a lot better as well. But on tape, he's a fantastic runner. I mean, he's extremely elusive. The straight line speed's there. He's one of the best running quarterbacks I've seen live in my dozen years of doing this. And so, he won the Gatorade Player of the Year in the state of Florida last year. And that's a pretty big honor for a junior to win, beating out Jeremiah Smith, who was the #1 overall recruit in the country, who signed with Ohio State. So I think the athletic upside of Carter Smith is extremely exciting. And I think it's actually good that they paired a high floor guy that's more of a safe take, that's a, field general, game manager type in Jaden Davis, with an exciting guy like Carter Smith that offers a little bit more athleticism, but isn't as refined as a passer. Some targets that Michigan, I guess, leads with, or they're in that top group with early on, or not early on, I guess now we're getting into the meat of things. Hardy Watts, on 300 offensive lineman out of New England. I think Michigan has the lead with him right now. It'll be interesting to see how the offensive line board really shakes out, but he's a really athletic interior offensive lineman that can kick out to tackle. I think Michigan's in that top 3 with Michael Carroll, who's another offensive lineman. I actually have him graded as a 5-star. Going to be a little tougher to land Carroll than Watts, but he's one of my favorites in the class for sure. The linebacker options are really exciting. I mentioned Elijah Melendez. He's also just a beast on the field. And I think Michigan does have a legitimate chance to flip him from Miami if they can somewhat figure out NIL. Kamar Archie, another kid out of the Hun School, which produced Owen Wafel last cycle, has always been one of my favorites. Just a big thumping linebacker that's an underrated athlete. And Nathaniel Wusu-Boateng down at IMG Academy is another linebacker that Michigan's really in on, that'll be making an official visit. That's just perfect for the will spot in Michigan's defense. So those are some of the guys that definitely come to mind that have Michigan in the top group that I'm really high on as prospects as well.
Well, you've done 2 things. One makes me feel good, one makes me feel bad, and they're both about the same exact thing. I came up with my best guest list just minutes before we started recording. A lot of names that you mentioned, you're like, yeah, that Michigan's in a good spot with him. And I'm like, yes. And then you mentioned names in all my discussions that I've had with recruiting people, with everything else, it was like, oh, I've not heard that name. They're not included on my list. And now I realize how far away I am. Anyway.
No, man, it's just tough. They're resetting the board on defense. I could have named so many names when you asked me the one question about names you didn't know. Like Maxwell Roy just popped into my head. He's another defensive lineman that Michigan's in. And like, it's just tough when you have a new staff that's resetting the board and there's these constant moving pieces. So I think we'll have even more new names pop up here soon.
Well, we're going to have to do this again soon because this could go at least another half hour. But we are time constrained somewhat over here. So let's have you on again sometime in the next couple of weeks, especially as Michigan kind of gets through its official visits, and we'll continue to break things down a little bit as where Michigan stands. So that's EJ Holland from On3, the Wolverine.com. Highly recommend you go over there and subscribe. In my opinion, it is the best of the all of the insider sites. I say that as someone who, like EJ, came from 24/7 Sports, and now that Steve Wiltfong is also over there from a national perspective, you just cannot beat it. So thanks again, EJ.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, that's going to do it for us today. We will be back tomorrow evening, very, very late, because probably won't be home until about 8 o'clock, and we will be talking about whatever we learned from the SMSB and Will Johnson camps. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will be back soon. Peace.